I still remember the smell of motor oil that would cling to my clothes every morning. For 3 years, I woke up on a fold-out cot between Dad's rusted Chevy and a wall of storage boxes while my sister Emma enjoyed her California king bed with an ensuite bathroom. "It's temporary, Olivia," my parents would say. 3 years isn't temporary. It's a statement about who matters and who doesn't. Now they're standing in my foyer, suitcases at their feet, asking if they can move into the east wing of my Lake Michigan estate. Funny how life comes full circle. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined my childhood garage would lead to a mansion, but looking back, maybe I should thank my parents for teaching me the most important lesson of my life. No one was going to hand me anything. My name is Olivia Martinez. I grew up in Pinecrest, Michigan, one of those forgotten Midwest towns where the biggest employer shut down before I was born, and everyone's still talking about it. My parents, Roberto and Lucia Martinez, weren't terrible people. At least that's what I tell my therapist now. They were just obvious about their priorities, and I wasn't one of them. It started when I was 14. My sister Emma was the golden child, 2 years older, conventionally pretty, and socially gifted in ways I never was. When our grandma passed away and left my parents a modest inheritance, they decided to renovate our 3-bedroom ranch house. The plans included transforming the master bedroom into a teen suite for Emma, complete with a walk-in closet and private bathroom. My small bedroom would become a home office for Dad's accounting business that never quite took off. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" I asked during the family meeting where they unveiled the blueprint. My mother barely looked up from the contractor's sketch. "The garage is insulated. We can set up a nice space for you out there." That night, I cried silently until my pillow was soaked. Not because I was losing my room, although that hurt, but because of how easily they made the decision. There was no hesitation, no recognition that they were literally putting me outside the family home. Dad converted half the garage that weekend. He installed drywall to separate my room from the car space, put in carpet remnants from the renovation, and hung a space heater that made concerning clicking noises when it ran too long. My bed was a metal cot with a foam mattress. My dresser was a set of plastic storage bins stacked against the wall. "It's actually kind of cool," Emma said, surveying my new space, "like having your own apartment." She meant well, but standing there in her designer jeans that our parents bought her while I wore thrift store finds, the gap between us couldn't have been more obvious. The winter in Michigan that year was brutal. The space heater could only do so much against the draft that snuck through the garage door seams. I wore layers to bed and could still see my breath some mornings. When I mentioned it to my parents, my father handed me an extra blanket. "Character building," he called. It school became my escape. While Emma was busy with cheerleading and student council, I disappeared into the computer lab. Mrs. Patel, our technology teacher, noticed my interest and started staying late to teach me coding. "You have a natural talent for this," she told me after I debugged a program the seniors had been struggling with. "Technology doesn't care where you sleep or what you wear. It only cares if your logic is sound." Those words changed something in me. I stopped seeing my garage bedroom as a punishment and started viewing it as liberation from expectations. While Emma's life was a constant performance, maintaining popularity, bringing home the right friends, dating the right boys, I was free to focus on what I loved. By 16, I was building websites for local businesses. I charged less than professional developers but delivered better results. The money wasn't much, but I saved every penny in an account my parents didn't know about. Emma's college fund was already established, but I heard my parents discussing how they would figure something out for my education when the time came. I figured it out myself. Senior year, while Emma was struggling through her sophomore year at State after changing her major for the 3rd time, I received a partial scholarship to a tech program in Chicago. It wasn't MIT or Stanford, but it was a foot in the door. Chicago. My mother frowned at dinner when I told them. That's so far and dangerous. Why can't you go to community college here like we discussed? Because I got a scholarship, I said, and an internship that will cover my housing. We always expected you'd stay closer to home, my father said, as if my future had been decided without my input. Emma needed to spread her wings, but you've always been more practical. Practical. Their code for less likely to succeed. I didn't argue. There was no point. I just nodded and returned to my garage, where I packed my few belongings and counted the days until August. The internship housing turned out to be a tiny studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood, shared with another student. The bathroom light flickered constantly, and the elevator worked maybe half the time. But it was mine, ours, and nobody could tell me to sleep in the garage because someone else's comfort mattered more. College wasn't easy. I worked my internship, 20 hours a week, took a full course load, and picked up freelance jobs on weekends. Sleep became a luxury. But every time exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, I remembered the cold garage floor and pushed harder. My roommate Zoe became the sister I wished I'd had. She was studying graphic design and often collaborated with me on projects. We pulled all-nighters fueled by ramen and ambition, dreaming about the company we'd start someday. Martinez and Chen Design, she'd say, sketching logos when we should have been studying. Chen and Martinez, I'd correct her, and we'd laugh until our neighbors pounded on the walls. Meanwhile, updates from home came primarily through holiday cards and occasional calls. Emma had dropped out of college after struggling academically. She moved back home at 20, where my parents welcomed her with open arms and converted my garage space back to store their cars. They mentioned this casually, as if discarding the last physical evidence of my existence there wasn't symbolic. Emma's going through a hard time, my mother explained during one of our rare calls. She needs support right now. I bit back the response that burned in my throat. And what did I need when I was sleeping in the garage? Instead, I focused on building my future. Zoe and I launched a small development company after graduation, specializing in security applications for small businesses. It was niche but growing steadily. We rented a small office space in a refurbished warehouse and hired 2 junior developers. Then came the pandemic. While other businesses struggled, ours thrived. Remote security monitoring became essential overnight. Our client list doubled, then tripled. We pivoted to developing a consumer app that allowed homeowners to monitor their property from anywhere. Security, temperature control, energy usage, all in one interface. HomeGuard launched in October 2020. By December, we had 100,000 downloads. By March 2021, we hit 1 million. A venture capital firm approached us with funding that made my eyes water. Suddenly, the girl from the garage was a CEO with employees and investors and an office with a view of Lake Michigan. I bought my house that summer, a restored Victorian on 3 acres in Lake Forest. With 8 bedrooms, a home theater, and a guest house, it was extravagant for one person, but I wanted space. Space that was mine, space that no one could take away. Zoe teased me about it. You could fit your parents' entire house in your living room. That's the point, I said, only half joking. Contact with my family had dwindled to holiday texts and an occasional social media like. They knew I was doing well. My company had been featured in some national coverage, but I kept the details vague. Not out of spite, but self-preservation. I'd learned early that my achievements were always secondary. Then came the call that changed everything. Olivia? It's Mom. Her voice sounded older, more fragile than I remembered. We hadn't spoken in months, maybe longer. Is everything okay? I asked, already calculating how long it would take to drive to Pinecrest if needed. Your father lost his job. The firm downsized and... Well, he's 62. They gave him a package, but it's not enough. And we made some investments that didn't work out. The subtext was clear even before she continued. Emma's still living with us, you know. She's been having a hard time finding work that suits her. Talents. She's become a bit of a local advocate, actually. Very active in community issues. But it doesn't pay well. I closed my eyes, gripping my phone tighter. Mom, what are you asking me? We need to sell the house. The market isn't good. Right now, but there's a buyer. The problem is finding somewhere to go. Emma found an apartment, but it's only 1 bedroom and with your father's back problems. I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. We saw your house in that magazine feature. All those empty rooms. It would just be temporary, of course. Until we get back on our feet. Temporary. The same word they used about my garage bedroom. 3 years of temporary that shaped my entire life. I'll need to think about it, I said finally. I'll call you back. That night, I sat on my balcony overlooking the garden and lake beyond. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The property that represented everything I'd fought for. The space that was mine alone. I thought about Emma in her lavish bedroom while I shivered under blankets beside the family sedan. I thought about the college fund they established for her, but not for me. I thought about all the times my achievements were footnotes compared to Emma's participation trophies. I also thought about my parents getting older. About Emma, who for all her advantages, never found her path. About the complicated tangle of resentment and love that is family. The next morning, I called my real estate agent. I'd like to look at properties in Pinecrest, Michigan, I said. Something modest but nice. 3 bedrooms, single level if possible. Good insulation. 2 weeks later, I drove back to my hometown for the first time in years. I parked in front of my childhood home, noting how much smaller it looked than in my memories. My parents stood on the porch, uncertainty on their faces. Emma hovered behind them. I'm not here to move you into my house, I said without preamble as I got out of my car. The flash of disappointment on their faces was unmistakable. I handed them a folder. I'm here to give you this. Inside was the deed to a ranch house 10 minutes away, paid in full. 3 bedrooms, a sunroom, no stairs to navigate as they aged. I don't understand, my father said, staring at the papers. It's yours, no mortgage. I've arranged for movers next week. Emma can have the 3rd bedroom until she figures things out. My mother started to cry. Emma looked stunned. My father opened and closed his mouth several times before finding words. Olivia, we can't accept this. It's too much. You taught me an important lesson when I was young, I said, keeping my voice even. You showed me that I needed to take care of myself because no one else would prioritize my needs. That lesson made me who I am today. So in a way, this house is because of you. The words hung in the air between us. Not quite forgiveness, not quite accusation, something more complicated. I've set up a maintenance account and property tax payments for 5 years, I continued. After that, it's up to you. I'm giving you security, not dependence. My mother stepped forward hesitantly. Can we start over? Be a family again? I looked at the 3 of them, these people who had shaped me through their presence and their absence. The garage bedroom had been my crucible, transforming pain into purpose. Could I have become who I am without that hardship? Probably not. We can try, I said finally. But some things need to be different. I'm not that girl in the garage anymore. I decide who comes into my space now. As I drove back to Chicago that evening, I felt lighter somehow. Not because I'd solved everything. Family is never that simple. But because I'd written my own ending to the garage bedroom story. My parents didn't get to move into my estate. They didn't get to claim the fruits of my labor after dismissing the seeds of my potential. Instead, they got something else. The chance to know the woman who emerged from that garage. The woman who built something from nothing. The woman who learned that the best revenge isn't cold service. It's creating a life so full that the past becomes just one chapter in a much longer, more beautiful story. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Success isn't just about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. About creating a life that honors the person you were when things were hardest. The one who kept going despite everything. The garage bedroom girl would be proud. Chicago welcomed me with a freezing rain that seemed fitting for my arrival. The bus dropped me at the station downtown, where towering buildings made me feel smaller than I already was. With 2 suitcases containing everything I owned, I navigated to the address of my shared apartment using a printed map because I couldn't afford a smartphone yet. My tech program housing turned out to be a 5th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that made my mother's warnings about city dangers seem less paranoid. The building's facade was crumbling, with security doors that didn't quite lock, and hallways perpetually scented with mysterious cooking odors that never quite smelled like food. The studio apartment measured roughly twice the size of my garage, space which wasn't saying much. But this time I was sharing it with a stranger, Zoe Chen, a graphic design student from California who'd arrived the day before. "You're Martinez?" she asked when I knocked, her eyes sweeping over my rain-soaked appearance and mismatched luggage. "I took the bed by the window. Hope that's cool." The bed was a metal frame with a mattress that sagged dramatically in the hot middle. There were 2 of them pushed against opposite walls, with about 4 feet of space between. A kitchenette consisting of a mini fridge, hot plate, and sink occupied one corner. The bathroom was so small, you had to sit sideways on the toilet if you were above average height. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it, because despite everything, it was mine. The first night, I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar city sounds, sirens, shouting, music throbbing from somewhere below, and felt a peculiar mix of terror and elation. I was free. Nobody was going to tell me my existence was inconvenient. Nobody was going to prioritize someone else's comfort over my basic needs. The thought was so overwhelming that I started crying, silent tears that I wiped away before Zoe could notice. But she did notice. "First night away from home?" she asked from her bed, voice gentle in the darkness. "Yeah," I admitted. "But I'm not homesick." She said, and I could hear her shifting to face me. "Sounds like there's a story there." That night, whispering across the darkness of our tiny shared apartment, I told someone the garage bedroom story for the first time. Not the sanitized version I'd recited during scholarship interviews where I spoke of learning independence early and developing self-sufficiency. The real version, with all its hurt and bewilderment. When I finished, Zoe was quiet for so long I thought she might have fallen asleep. "Your parents sound like assholes," she finally said. The blunt assessment startled a laugh out of me. No one had ever validated my experience so directly before. "Tomorrow," she continued, "we're getting matching mugs. Because we're roommates, but also because fuck people who make kids sleep in garages." That became our first tradition, the fuck the garage mugs, as we called them privately. They were cheap ceramic cups from a dollar store, but they symbolized something important: solidarity, a promise that we recognized each other's worth. Classes started the following Monday. While my scholarship covered tuition, it didn't stretch to textbooks or the laptop everyone was expected to have. I'd brought my desktop computer from home, an outdated machine I'd assembled from parts purchased with my website money, but it sat uselessly in our apartment. The financial aid office offered a sympathetic smile and a list of on-campus jobs. The tech department had stricter requirements than I'd anticipated, with coursework that assumed access to specific software and hardware. On the first day, I sat in programming fundamentals watching other students open sleek laptops while I clutched a notebook and pen, feeling the gulf between us widen with each passing minute. "You'll need to complete the coding lab by Friday," the professor announced. "Submit your work through the online portal." After class, I approached him hesitantly. "Professor Miller, I don't have a laptop yet. Is there another way I can complete the assignments?" He blinked at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. "The computer labs are open until midnight, but you really need your own machine for this program. It's in the requirements." I nodded, swallowing my explanation about financial constraints. "I'll figure it out." That night, I walked 3 miles to a 24-hour diner with free Wi-Fi, ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu, and used the public library's website to search for computer access beyond the university's limited lab hours. My scholarship hung in the balance. One failed assignment, and I could lose everything. The solution came from an unexpected source. Zoe returned to our apartment late, carrying a battered laptop. "My friend upgraded," she explained, placing it on my bed. "He said you can have this one. It's old, but it runs." The machine was indeed ancient, a bulky Toshiba with missing keys and a battery that lasted maybe 40 minutes, but it worked. That night, I installed open-source alternatives to the required software and completed my first assignment hunched over at our tiny shared table. "What are you studying anyway?" Zoe asked, sketching something in her notebook while I typed. "Cybersecurity with a focus on application development," I said without looking up. "You?" "Visual communication. But I'm thinking of switching to UX. Design." She spun her sketchbook toward me, like making digital interfaces that don't suck. I glanced at her drawing, a sleek, intuitive layout for some kind of app, and felt a spark of connection. "That's actually really smart. Most programmers are terrible at designing interfaces people can actually use. Most designers don't understand what's happening behind the scenes," she countered with a smile. It was a throwaway conversation, but it planted a seed that would eventually grow into our business partnership. For that moment, though, we were just 2 struggling students trying to stay afloat. The first semester nearly broke me. I secured a work-study position in the university's IT department, which helped financially, but consumed 20 hours weekly. Classes demanded another 30 hours, and freelance web development, the only way I could afford basics like food and textbooks, filled weekends and late nights. Sleep became theoretical. Meals consisted of ramen, day-old bagels from the campus, cafe where Zoe worked, and protein bars bought in bulk. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, surviving on determination and the ever-present fear of ending up back in Pinecrest. Christmas approached, bringing the question of whether to return home for the holiday. My mother called twice, making tentative overtures about picking me up. "Emma's really looking forward to seeing you," she said, a transparent attempt at manipulation. "She's been saying how much she misses her sister." The sister who never once objected to my garage banishment. The sister who brought friends over to gawk at my weird living situation. The sister who complained when I used her bathroom to shower because the garage didn't have plumbing. "I can't," I said, inventing an IT department emergency that required my presence during break. "Maybe spring." Instead, I spent Christmas with Zoe, whose own family situation was complicated enough that she stayed in Chicago too. We splurged on a frozen pizza, decorated our apartment with paper snowflakes, and watched holiday movies on her friend's Netflix account. It wasn't traditional, but it felt more like home than any place I'd lived before. January brought record-low temperatures and heating bills we couldn't afford. We took to studying in public buildings, libraries, mall food courts, campus lounges, to stay warm during the day. At night, we slept in layers of clothing, sharing the same bed to conserve heat when temperatures dropped below 0. "We should make a pact," Zoe said one particularly frigid evening. We were huddled under every blanket we owned, watching our breath form clouds in the dim light. 10 years from now, no matter what, we meet up. And we're either successful or we figure out why not. Define successful, I murmured, my teeth chattering slightly. Warm, she said immediately. A place where the heat works. Food that doesn't come dehydrated in packets. Maybe a view that isn't an alley. Ambitious, I teased, but there was yearning in my voice. How about this? Success means never having to move back home. Deal. She extended her hand from beneath the blankets, and we shook on it. A solemn promise between two freezing students with outsized dreams. Spring semester. Brought a stroke of luck. My programming professor recommended me for a paid internship with a local security firm. The position wasn't glamorous, mostly testing code and documenting bugs, but it paid twice my work-study wage and offered experience in my field. The office became my sanctuary. Unlike our apartment, it was climate-controlled, with reliable Wi-Fi and free coffee. I arrived early and left late, using their computers to complete coursework after hours. The senior developers noticed my dedication and began offering guidance, sometimes pointing me toward interesting problems or including me in their lunch orders. "You've got good instincts, Sam," the lead developer told me after I identified a vulnerability in their client portal. "Most interns just follow instructions. You actually think about what you're doing." It was the first professional validation I'd ever received, and it sustained me through the grueling schedule. Between work, classes, and freelance jobs, I averaged 4 hours of sleep nightly. My health suffered. Persistent headaches, a cough that wouldn't quit, dark circles permanent beneath my eyes. But stopping wasn't an option. In April, disaster struck. Our landlord announced a rent increase effective immediately, citing building improvements that never materialized. The additional $200 monthly might as well have been $2,000. We simply didn't have it. "We could get a third roommate?" Zoe suggested half-heartedly, looking around our minuscule space. "Someone really small. Maybe a child." The joke fell flat as we both contemplated our options. Moving meant first and last month's rent somewhere else, money neither of us had. Staying meant finding an additional income source in an already impossible schedule. I thought of calling home, asking for help. The idea was so foreign it felt like contemplating surgery without anesthesia. In my entire life, I'd never asked my parents for anything and received it without strings attached. Why would this be different? Instead, I approached Sam at the security firm. "Is there any possibility of more hours?" I asked during our weekly check-in. "Or additional projects I could take on remotely?" He studied me with concern. "Olivia, you're already working more than we're officially paying you for. I notice when you stay late." He hesitated. "Is everything okay?" The question nearly undid me. Was everything okay? Nothing had been okay for years. I was exhausted, perpetually hungry, constantly calculating how to stretch every dollar. One unexpected expense away from homelessness. "Rent increase," I managed, hating the wobble in my voice. "It's fine. I'll figure something out." Sam was quiet for a moment. "There's a coding competition next month. First prize is $5,000. The firm sponsors a team every year." He slid a flyer across the desk. "We already have our official entry, but there's nothing saying you couldn't enter independently. I'd be willing to mentor you." I stared at the paper. The challenge focused on developing security solutions, exactly my area of interest. Even without winning, participation would look good on my resume, and the prize money would solve our housing crisis several times over. "What would I need?" I asked. "Time," he said bluntly, "which you don't have. But I can't authorize more. Paid hours, and you're already working too many unpaid ones." That evening, I made the hardest decision since leaving home. I would take a leave of absence from my freelance web development work, sacrificing income we desperately needed to focus on the competition. We'd need to survive 6 weeks on Zoe's cafe wages and my reduced internship hours. "Are you sure about this?" Zoe asked when I explained the plan. "That's a long shot to bet everything on." "No," I admitted, "but I don't see another option. Do you?" She considered this, then shook her head. "All right, let's do it. I can pick up some graphic design gigs to help cover groceries." The next 6 weeks became a blur of code and caffeine. I built a security application that identified network vulnerabilities and suggested mitigation strategies. Nothing revolutionary, but solidly executed. Sam provided guidance during lunch breaks and sent encouraging texts when I hit roadblocks. Zoe kept me fed, making sure I remembered to eat something besides vending machine snacks. The night before submission, a fatal error crashed my entire project. Hours of debugging revealed a fundamental flaw in my approach, one that would require rebuilding from scratch. With submission due at noon, I had 10 hours to recreate 6 weeks of work. I called Sam, frantic. "I need to start over," I explained, my voice tight with exhaustion and desperation. "There's no way I can finish in time." "What if you pivot?" he asked. "Instead of rebuilding the entire application, focus on the novel parts. Create a proof of concept." It was good advice. I scrapped the implementation but kept the core algorithm, creating a streamlined demo that showcased my innovation without the bells and whistles. By morning, I had something presentable. Not the polished product I'd envisioned, but a working prototype. I submitted with minutes to spare, then collapsed into bed, sleeping through 2 classes and a work shift. When I finally checked my email, 20 hours later, I had messages from both the university and the internship about my absences. "Worth it if you win," Zoe said as I frantically apologized to professors and supervisors. "A complete disaster if you don't." She was right. The next 3 weeks of waiting felt like balancing on a knife's edge. Our rent was due, with the increase, and we had less than half the amount needed. I'd returned to freelancing with desperate intensity, but projects took time to complete and clients took time to pay. The competition results arrived on a Tuesday morning. I was in class when my phone vibrated with an email notification. For a full minute, I stared at the screen, afraid to open it. "Ms. Martinez?" Professor Wilson's voice pulled me back to the lecture hall. "Is there a problem?" "No, sorry," I mumbled, tucking my phone away. The email would still be there after class. Good or bad news could wait another 40 minutes. Except it couldn't, because 2 minutes later, my phone began ringing. Not vibrating, full. Volume ringing, despite being set to silent. Sam's name flashed on the screen. I fumbled to silence it, face burning as students turned to stare. Professor Wilson gave me a pointed look. "I need to take this," I whispered, gathering my things and hurrying from the room. In the hallway, I answered breathlessly. "Sam? What's going on?" "You did it," he said without preamble. "Second place. $10,000. I sank to the floor, my knees suddenly unreliable. "What? The prize was $5,000 for first place." A tech investor was at the judging panel. He doubled the prize pool and added a second-place category because he was impressed with your approach. "Olivia, he wants to meet you." The world tilted sideways. $10,000. It was more money than I'd ever had at once. Enough for rent and breathing room. Enough to buy a proper laptop. Enough to stop the constant, grinding anxiety about basic survival. I started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed in the empty hallway. Then I was crying, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. A security guard approached with concern, but I waved him away, pressing the phone to my ear. "Olivia, are you there?" Sam sounded worried. "I'm here," I managed. "I'm just processing. The awards ceremony is Friday. The investor specifically wants to talk with you about your project. This could be huge." It was huge already. That night, Zoe and I celebrated with takeout from a real restaurant, our first non-ramen meal in weeks. We sat on my bed, eating pad thai directly from containers and planning how to allocate the windfall. Rent first, I said. Then laptops. For both of us. Both? Zoe raised an eyebrow. You've been using that dinosaur of yours as long as I've known you, I pointed out. We're upgrading together or not at all. She smiled, nudging my shoulder with hers. Look at you. Garage girl made good. Not yet, I said. But I'm getting there. The awards ceremony changed everything. The investor, Marcus Devereaux, wasn't just impressed with my security concept. He wanted to develop it into a commercial product. His venture capital firm offered seed funding for a startup, with me as the technical co-founder. We'd bring in experienced management, he explained over coffee afterwards. You'd focus on development while learning the business side. It was a golden opportunity, and one that would require leaving school before completing my degree. A massive gamble on a concept that had nearly failed at the last minute. I need time to think, I told him. And to discuss it with my partner. His eyebrows rose. Partner? Not business partner yet, I clarified. But hopefully, she's the design talent I need to make this work properly. That night, Zoe and I stayed up until dawn weighing options. The seed funding would provide salaries for both of us, modest but real income. The catch was the relocation to Boston, where Devereaux's firm was based, and the risk of pouring ourselves into a venture that might fail. What happens if it crashes and burns? Zoe asked, always the pragmatist. We'd be dropouts with no degrees, and a failed startup. We'd be exactly where we are now, I countered, except with experience and connections we don't have yet. She studied me in the pale light of early morning. You really want to do this? It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I want us to do this. Together. I took a deep breath. Zoe, I've never had anyone believe in me the way you have. Not my family, not anyone. I trust you, and I think we could build something amazing. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, if we're doing this, we need a name. Something that isn't just about security, but about creating safe spaces. I thought about what security really meant to me. Not just protection from external threats, but the feeling of finally having somewhere I belonged, somewhere I mattered. Safe haven, I suggested. Digital security that feels like coming home. Zoe smiled slowly. Okay, garage girl, let's build a haven. 2 weeks later, we withdrew from our respective programs, packed our few belongings, and boarded a bus to Boston. I hadn't told my parents about any of it. Not the competition, not the prize money, certainly not the startup opportunity. Some part of me feared they'd find a way to claim it, to explain why Emma deserved a portion, or why they should have input on my decisions. As the Chicago skyline receded behind us, I felt a curious mixture of terror and possibility. We had $10,000, promises of seed funding that might never materialize, and a concept that existed mostly in our imaginations. By any rational measure, we were making a terrible mistake. But rationality hadn't gotten me this far. Stubborn determination had. The absolute refusal to end up back in that garage had propelled me through impossible circumstances. And now, that same force was carrying me towards something that felt dangerously like hope. Boston awaited with unknown challenges. But for the first time, I wasn't facing them alone. Boston greeted us with steady rain and gray skies that matched our uncertain futures. Marcus Devereaux's assistant had arranged temporary housing, a corporate apartment in Cambridge that felt impossibly luxurious after our Chicago studio. 2 separate bedrooms, a kitchen with actual counter space, water pressure that didn't fluctuate, wildly mid-shower. I feel like we're committing fraud just being here, Zoe whispered that first night as we stood in the living room, afraid to touch anything. The furniture was bland but expensive, the kind of carefully neutral decor that signaled corporate ownership. I ran my fingers along the back of a pristine cream sofa. Maybe we are. Maybe someone's going to realize they made a horrible mistake investing in 2 college dropouts. Then we better work faster than they can change their minds, she replied. That became our unofficial motto during those early months. Work faster than they can change their minds. We treated the apartment like a temporary gift that could be revoked at any moment. 14-hour days became standard. Meals were eaten over keyboards. Sleep was a luxury we couldn't afford when our future hung in such delicate balance. The promised seed funding came through after 6 weeks of intensive development work. $500,000. A sum so astronomical, I made Zoe triple-check the contract. But there were conditions attached to every dollar. Quarterly progress reviews. Technical benchmarks that seemed nearly impossible. A timeline that gave us 18 months to develop a market-ready product. They're setting us up to fail, Zoe worried after our first meeting with the full investment team. These expectations are unrealistic. They're making sure we're hungry, I countered, though privately I shared her concern. If we hit even 70% of these goals, we'll have something valuable. Marcus Devereaux himself seemed to occupy a strange middle ground between mentor and inquisitor. A 40-ish venture capitalist with a tech background, he recognized the potential in our security concept, but remained skeptical of our capacity to execute it. This is a competitive field, he reminded us during one particularly difficult review. Established companies with hundreds of developers are working on similar problems. Your advantage is speed and innovation, not resources. It was a polite way of saying we had no margin for error. A single significant misstep could derail the entire project. The pressure was immense, and exactly what I needed to thrive. There had been a moment, midway through our relocation process, when I'd almost called home. Some childish part of me wanted to announce my sudden change in fortune, to prove that the garage girl had become someone worth acknowledging. But what would that conversation have looked like? Hi, Mom, Dad. Remember how you made me sleep in the garage because Emma needed the real bedroom? Well, I just got $500,000 to develop my security application. The fantasy crumbled as quickly as it formed. My parents wouldn't suddenly value me because of external validation. That lesson had been learned through years of straight-A report cards met with distracted nods, while Emma's C- efforts earned celebration dinners. So I didn't call. I didn't email. I removed the last shackles of seeking their approval and poured that energy into building something that would matter regardless of their recognition. Safe Haven's development followed the classic startup trajectory, periods of breathtaking progress punctuated by devastating setbacks. 3 months in, we discovered a fundamental flaw in our approach to data encryption that required rebuilding our core architecture. 2 months later, a promising partnership with a larger security firm dissolved when their management changed direction. Each crisis demanded solutions I wasn't qualified to provide. I'd completed only 3 semesters of formal education in a 4-year program. The knowledge gaps were real and dangerous. Nights became research sessions, with online courses and technical documentation replacing sleep. Zoe similarly pushed herself beyond exhaustion, redesigning interfaces and user experiences while learning the business side of software development. "When was the last time you went outside?" she asked me one Sunday morning, placing coffee beside my workstation. I'd been coding for 18 hours straight, chasing an elusive bug that corrupted user data during synchronization. I blinked, genuinely unable to remember. Tuesday? Maybe Wednesday? That's what I thought. She closed my laptop despite my protests. "We're going for a walk. 20 minutes. The code will still be broken when we get back." She was right, of course. Fresh air and movement cleared my mental fog, and I solved the synchronization issue within an hour of returning. It became another tradition. Forced breaks when one of us noticed the other spiraling into unhealthy patterns. Neither of us was good at self-regulation, but we excelled at protecting each other. 6 months into development, we reached our first major milestone, a functional prototype that could identify network vulnerabilities in real time and suggest mitigation strategies. It wasn't pretty, and it couldn't handle the load of a large enterprise, but it worked. Marcus arranged a demonstration for select potential clients, mostly small tech firms and startups like ourselves who understood the value of affordable security tools. The stakes were tremendous. No actual investment was on the table yet, but the feedback would determine whether our next round of funding materialized. The night before the demo, disaster struck. A server update corrupted our database, rendering the entire system non-functional. By 3 a.m., we'd managed to restore basic functionality, but the machine learning component, the real innovation, remained offline. "We need to postpone," Zoe insisted, eyes bloodshot from hours of troubleshooting. "We can't demo a half-working product." "If we postpone, we look unprofessional and unprepared," I countered. "We'll lose credibility we can't afford to lose. If we demo a broken product, we'll look incompetent, which is worse." We were both right, both wrong, and both too exhausted to think clearly. At 4 a.m., I made an executive decision that would either save our company or destroy it before it truly began. "We'll demo what works and be transparent about what doesn't," I said. "No pretending, no excuses. Just honesty about where we are in the development process and a clear timeline for resolving the issues." Zoe looked skeptical. "These are potential investors, not friends. They don't care about honesty. They care about returns." "Then they should care about whether we'll tell them when things go wrong," I said with more confidence than I felt, "because things always go wrong eventually." The demo was scheduled for 9 a.m. We arrived at the conference room at 7, setting up equipment and running final diagnostic tests. The machine learning component remained stubbornly offline despite our best efforts. By 8:30, potential clients began arriving, serious-faced executives with technical backgrounds and skeptical expressions. Marcus pulled me aside just before we began. "How bad is it?" I explained the situation without softening the blow. "The core security scanning works perfectly. The predictive component doesn't. We can demonstrate 70% of our promised functionality today." He studied me, his expression unreadable. "And you're telling me this why?" "Because you're our investor, and you should know," I said, confused by the question. "Most founders would smile and demo the working parts without mentioning the problems," he observed. "They'd buy time to fix things quietly." The suggestion made my stomach turn. "That's not how I operate." His lips quirked slightly. "No, it's not. That's becoming increasingly clear." He straightened his tie. "Tell them exactly what you told me. Lead with it." And so I did. Standing before a room of potential clients and investors, I opened not with our successes, but with our current failure. I explained the corrupted database, the overnight recovery efforts, and the specific technical challenges we were facing with the machine learning implementation. "What you'll see today is our core security platform functioning as designed," I concluded. "What you won't see is the predictive component that sets our solution apart from existing tools. We expect to resolve those issues within 2 weeks, and we're happy to schedule follow-up demonstrations at that time." The room was silent. I could feel Zoe's tension beside me, could sense Marcus watching carefully from the back. Had I just destroyed our chances? The moment stretched unbearably before a woman in the front row, the CTO of a promising fintech startup, spoke. "I appreciate the transparency," she said. "Most security demos I attend are smoke and mirrors. Show me what does work, and let's talk about the architecture behind what doesn't." The rest of the presentation flowed naturally from that honest beginning. We demonstrated the functioning components, discussed the technical challenges openly, and engaged in genuine dialogue about our approach. By the end, Business cards were exchanged, and follow-up meetings scheduled. Far from disaster, the honest demonstration had built credibility we couldn't have achieved through perfect execution. Alone. Afterward, Marcus took us to lunch at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Charles River. It was the kind of place that didn't list prices on the menu, a detail that would have terrified us a year earlier. That, he said as we settled into our seats, was not what I expected. "Is that good or bad?" Zoe asked, directly as always. "It's interesting." He studied us both. "You understand that the standard startup playbook is to project confidence at all costs? To present a seamless front regardless of internal chaos?" I shrugged. "That approach doesn't work for security products. If we're selling trust, we need to be trustworthy." "Exactly," Zoe added. "Our whole concept is about creating safe spaces. How can we do that if we're not honest about our own vulnerabilities?" Marcus leaned back, something like appreciation flickering across his features. "You're either brilliantly intuitive or dangerously naive. I'm still deciding which." "Why not both?" I suggested, and he laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him. That lunch marked a turning point in our relationship with our primary investor. The tightly controlled quarterly reviews evolved into more collaborative strategy sessions. Marcus began introducing us to his broader network of tech entrepreneurs and potential clients. We weren't just an investment to be managed anymore. We were innovators to be cultivated. 2 weeks later, as promised, we delivered a fully functional prototype with the machine learning component restored and improved. The follow-up demonstrations led to our first 3 paying clients, small companies willing to take a chance on promising technology still in development. The revenue was minimal, but the validation was priceless. By our 1-year mark in Boston, Safe Haven had evolved from concept to reality. We'd expanded to a team of 6, bringing on 2 junior developers and a marketing specialist, with Zoe officially serving as Chief Design Officer while I took the title of CTO. We'd moved from the corporate apartment to a small office in Cambridge's tech corridor with a dedicated development environment and proper workspace. My parents still had no idea. The thought occasionally surfaced during rare, quiet moments. Did they wonder what had happened to me? Did they imagine I'd failed out of college? Or did they simply file my absence under expected disappointments and focus on Emma's ongoing saga? I pushed the questions away each time, focusing instead on the growing proof that I'd made the right decision in leaving. Our breakthrough moment came 18 months after arriving in Boston. Microsoft's cybersecurity division reached out about potentially integrating our vulnerability detection algorithms into their enterprise security suite. Not an acquisition. We weren't ready to surrender our independence, but a licensing arrangement that would exponentially expand our reach while maintaining our autonomy. The negotiations were intense. Microsoft wanted exclusivity. We insisted on retaining rights to develop consumer applications independently. They offered a flat fee. We pushed for royalties based on implementation. The discussions stretched over weeks, with teams of lawyers parsing contract language while we continued refining our core technology. In the midst of these high stakes negotiations, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I'd let unknown calls go to voicemail, but I was expecting contact from Microsoft's technical team. I answered while reviewing contract revisions. "Olivia Martinez speaking." "Olivia? It's Mom." My hand froze on the document. 3 years had passed since I'd heard her voice. 3 years of building something from nothing, of proving every day that I didn't need their approval to succeed. And now, without warning, here she was, intruding on the most important professional moment of my life. "Mom." I kept my voice neutral. "This is unexpected." "I know, honey. I've been trying to reach you for months. Your old number doesn't work, and the university wouldn't give us any information." She sounded older, more fragile than I remembered. "We've been worried." The statement was so absurd I almost laughed. Worried? After 3 years of silence? After making me sleep in a garage because my existence was inconvenient? "I'm fine," I said shortly. "I'm actually in a meeting right now. Can I call you back?" Of course, she hurried to say. "It's just, there are some things happening. Here, with your father's health, and Emma's situation. We could really use your help, Olivia." And there it was. Not concern for my well-being, but need for my assistance. Some things never changed. "I'll call you back," I repeated, then ended the call. Zoe, who'd been reviewing the same contract across the table, raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" "My mother," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "After 3 years of silence, she's calling because they need my help." Zoe's expression hardened. Garage parents making a comeback tour? Classic. I should have been angry or hurt or something. Instead, I felt oddly detached, as if the call had come from a distant acquaintance rather than the woman who raised me. The garage girl would have been devastated by the transparent self-interest of the contact. The CEO I'd become recognized it as simply another negotiation tactic, one far less sophisticated than those I navigated daily. "I'll deal with it later," I said, turning back to the contract. "Microsoft's proposal is more important right now." And it was. The Microsoft deal, when finally executed, transformed Safe Haven overnight. The initial payment alone, $8 million for a 3-year licensing arrangement, was enough to fuel our expansion plans for years. The partnership lent us credibility that attracted other enterprise clients and opened doors previously closed to us. We moved to larger offices in downtown Boston. Our team grew to 15, then 25. Industry publications began mentioning Safe Haven among security startups to watch. Venture capital firms approached us about second-round funding, offering terms that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. Through it all, that phone call lingered in the back of my mind. I didn't return it immediately, or the next day, or the next week. "Mom and Dad are losing the house. Dad's health is worse than they told you. They're too proud to ask for real help, but they need it. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for 5 minutes of your time. A phone call. That's it. Emma P.S. I saw the Forbes article about Safe Haven. Proud of you for whatever that's worth now." I read it twice, then forwarded it to Zoe with a single question mark. Her response came minutes later. "Garage parents losing garage house? Poetic justice. But you should call, not for them. For you." Zoe knew me better than anyone. She understood that beneath my success and apparent indifference lay unresolved wounds. The garage hadn't just been a physical space. It had been a message about my value in my family's eyes. A message I'd spent years proving wrong through achievements they knew nothing about. I waited until evening, after our executive team meeting, and called the number Emma had included in her signature. "Hello?" Her voice hadn't changed much. Still that slight lilt that had always made her sound perpetually surprised. "It's Olivia." "Oh!" Genuine shock. "I didn't think you'd actually call. I mean, I hoped, but..." "You said 5 minutes," I reminded her. "What's going on with Mom and Dad?" She exhaled slowly. "Right. Straight to business." "That's fair." A pause. "Dad's heart condition has gotten worse. He needs surgery they can't afford, even with the mysterious medical fund that appeared out of nowhere. So they'd figured out the anonymous assistance came from me. Not surprising, there weren't many other candidates. The house has a reverse mortgage," Emma continued. "They took it out years ago to pay for my second try at college. Now the bank is foreclosing because they've missed payments. They'll be homeless in 60 days. The information landed with less impact than it might have once had. I'd spent years imagining scenarios where my parents faced consequences for their choices. Now that it was happening, I felt oddly hollow. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't wish homelessness on anyone, especially aging parents with health conditions. But I'm not sure what you expect me to do. Nothing. Everything. I don't know. Emma's voice cracked slightly. Look, I know what we did to you was wrong. What I did, or didn't do, was wrong too. I watched them exile you to that disgusting garage and said nothing because I was afraid they'd take away my privileges if I objected. The admission was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't respond. You were 14, she continued into my silence. A child. And I was 16, old enough to know better, but too selfish to risk my comfort. I've had years to think about what kind of person does that to their sister. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice carefully controlled. Because you've seen I'm successful and can bail the family out? No. She sounded tired. I'm telling you because it's true, and I should have said it years ago, before you disappeared to Chicago. Before you started a multi-million-dollar company without telling any of us. Before Dad started needing surgeries we can't afford. So what is it you want from me exactly? A chance to make things right, she said simply. For all of us. I laughed, the sound sharper than intended. That's not how it works, Emma. You don't get to ignore someone for years and then demand reconciliation when it's convenient. I know, she said softly. I know that. But I'm asking anyway, because they're getting old, and you've built this amazing life, and maybe, just maybe, there's room in it somewhere for the family that failed you. The conversation left me unsettled for days afterward. I threw myself into work with renewed intensity, reviewing acquisition offers with our legal team, testing new security protocols with our developers, approving marketing campaigns for our consumer products, anything to avoid considering Emma's request. Zoe watched this frenzy with growing concern. Finally, after a week of 18-hour workdays, she intervened, showing up at my apartment with takeout and a firm expression that brooked no argument. You're spiraling, she said, placing containers of Thai food on my kitchen counter. And you're going to burn out before you figure out what to do about your family. There's nothing to figure out, I insisted, even as I gratefully accepted the pad thai she handed me. They want money. I can give them money. End of story. She fixed me with a look honed through years of friendship. If that were true, you'd have written a check on day one and moved on. This isn't about money. She was right, of course. If it had been simply financial, I could have resolved the situation immediately. Safe Haven's success meant I could buy my parents' house outright without noticing the expense. I could pay for the best medical care available. I could set up trust, funds that would support them for the rest of their lives. But what Emma was asking for went beyond financial rescue. She wanted reconciliation, a healing of family wounds that had shaped my entire adult life. And I wasn't sure such healing was possible or even desirable. What would you do? I asked Zoe, genuinely curious. If your family had treated you that way and then came back years later asking for another chance. She considered this while twirling noodles around her fork. I'd probably help with the practical stuff, surgery, housing, but keep my emotional distance, set very clear boundaries. That sounds reasonable. But, she continued, I'm not you. My family issues are different from yours, and I don't have the same need to prove myself that you do. I don't need to prove myself, I objected. Don't you? She raised an eyebrow. Olivia, we built a $500 million company in 5 years. Normal people don't do that without some kind of internal drive that's borderline pathological. For me, it was escaping my parents' expectations that I'd take over the family restaurant. For you, it was proving the garage didn't define you. Her assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Much of my success had indeed been fueled by the need to prove my worth. First to my family, then to the world at large. Each achievement had been a silent rebuke to those who had underestimated me. The next morning, I made two decisions. First, I would provide the practical assistance my parents needed, paying off their reverse mortgage, covering the surgery costs, ensuring they had stable housing. Second, I would see them in person for the first time in nearly a decade. The arrangements were made through Emma. A date was set. 2 weeks later, after their immediate financial crisis had been resolved through my anonymous interventions, I would fly to Michigan, meet them at their home, and… what? I wasn't sure. What came after that? Forgiveness seemed impossible. Reconciliation felt hollow. Perhaps all I could offer was closure. For them and for myself. Safe Haven's pending acquisition discussions provided a convenient business justification for travel. I told our executive team I needed a few personal days to consider our options. Only Zoe knew the real purpose of my trip. "Do you want me to come with you?" she offered the night before my flight. Moral support and all that. I considered it briefly. Having Zoe there would make the confrontation easier to bear. She would provide perspective and prevent me from either retreating into coldness or giving in to decades of conditioning that told me to minimize my needs. No, I decided finally. This is something I need to do alone. The flight to Detroit was smooth, the rental car transaction efficient. I'd booked a hotel room rather than staying at my parents' house, a boundary I wasn't willing to cross, and spent the night before our meeting reviewing acquisition documents to distract myself from the impending confrontation. Morning came with leaden skies and a steady drizzle that matched my mood. I dressed carefully in the hotel room, choosing a simple gray dress and cardigan that projected success without ostentation. No jewelry except small diamond studs and my watch. Hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Minimal makeup. The drive to Pinecrest felt surreal. Streets that had once defined my world now seemed smaller, shabbier than memory suggested. The economic decline that had been beginning during my childhood had progressed, with shuttered storefronts and fading signage marking the main street. I turned onto Cedar Lane, the quiet residential street where I'd spent 14 years before my garage exile. The house looked much as I remembered, a modest ranch-style home with white siding and black shutters. The lawn was neatly maintained despite my father's health issues. Some priorities never changed. Emma's car, an aging Honda with university, parking stickers, sat in the driveway. I parked behind it, turned off the engine, and sat for a long moment gathering courage. This was harder than pitching to Microsoft executives, harder than negotiating with venture capitalists, harder than anything my professional life had demanded. Finally, I stepped out of the car and approached the front door. Before I could ring the bell, it opened, revealing Emma. Older, more subdued than the golden girl of my memories. Her blonde hair was shorter now, her face lined with a maturity that hadn't been present when I'd left. "You came," she said simply, stepping back to let me enter. I said I would. I stepped past her into the house, noting changes and constants. New furniture in the living room. The same family photos on the wall, though with additions chronicling Emma's adult life. None of me after age 14. My parents waited in the kitchen, the heart of the home during my childhood. My father sat at the table, noticeably thinner. Then I remembered, his once robust frame diminished by illness. My mother stood by the counter, hands clasped tightly before her, eyes wide with uncertainty. "Olivia," she breathed, taking a half step forward before stopping herself. "You look successful," I supplied when she trailed off. "I was going to say, grown up," she said softly. "But yes, successful too." My father cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming, and for…" He gestured vaguely, encompassing the house that would have been lost without my intervention. I remained standing just inside the kitchen doorway, maintaining physical distance that mirrored my emotional state. "You're welcome. I understand the surgery is scheduled for next month?" He nodded. Yes, the doctors are optimistic. The conversation felt stilted, formal, as if we were acquaintances rather than family, which in many ways we were. These people were biologically related to me, but they were not the support system that term usually implied. Would you like coffee? My mother offered, falling back on hospitality as a social script. Or tea? I remember you liked tea. Nothing, thank you. I remained standing. Accepting refreshments would suggest this was a social visit rather than the reckoning. It needed to be. I think we should discuss why I'm here. Emma moved to stand beside me. Not quite allied, but not opposed either. Mom, Dad, we need to talk about what happened. About the garage. My mother flinched visibly. My father's gaze dropped to the table. That was a long time ago, he said quietly. We did what we thought was necessary at the time. Necessary? I repeated, the word tasting bitter. It was necessary to make your 14-year-old daughter sleep in an unheated garage for 3 years? We didn't have enough bedrooms, my mother began, the familiar justification rising to her lips. You had 3 bedrooms, I cut her off. You chose to give Emma the master suite, convert my bedroom to a home office that was rarely used, and put me in the garage. Those were choices, not necessities. The blunt assessment hung in the air between us. For perhaps the first time, I was stating plainly what had happened rather than minimizing or rationalizing it. You're right, my father said, surprising me. Those were choices. Bad ones. My mother made a small sound of protest, but he silenced her with a look. No, Diana. We need to be honest here. We prioritized Emma's comfort over Olivia's basic needs. We told ourselves it was temporary, but we let it continue for years because it was convenient for us. His admission was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't respond. I'd prepared for defensiveness, for minimization, for the same dismissal of my experience that had characterized my adolescence. Direct acknowledgement left me momentarily unbalanced. Why? I asked finally, the question that had haunted me for years. What made her needs so much more important than mine? My mother sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 60-plus years. She was struggling, socially, academically. The counselor said building her confidence was crucial. And mine wasn't? You were always so capable, my father said. Independent. You seemed to manage whatever we threw at you. Emma fell apart under pressure. So I was punished for being resilient, I concluded flatly, while she was rewarded for fragility. Emma flinched beside me. That's fair, she said quietly. I learned early that falling apart got attention. Being helpless was more valuable than being competent. It was a surprisingly insightful assessment from the sister I'd resented for so long. Perhaps the years had given her perspective too. We failed you, my father said simply. There's no justification that makes it okay. We prioritized one child over another, and the consequences are sitting right in front of us. A daughter who succeeded wildly despite us, not because of us. My mother wiped tears from her eyes. When we saw the articles about your company, what you've built, I was so proud and so ashamed, because none of that success had anything to do with us. We gave you nothing but obstacles. That's not entirely true, I said after a moment. You taught me self-reliance. You showed me that I couldn't count on others to prioritize my needs. Those lessons made me who I am today. The statement wasn't meant as forgiveness, but it was the closest thing to positive acknowledgement I could offer. My success had indeed been built partly on the harsh lessons of my childhood. The garage had taught me to be self-sufficient, to trust my own judgment, to work harder than everyone around me. Without those lessons, would I have had the drive to build safe haven? What happens now? My mother asked hesitantly. With the house, with your father's medical care. "The mortgage has been paid off," I said. "The house is yours, free and clear. Dad's surgery and ongoing care will be covered. I've established a trust to manage those expenses." Relief washed over their faces, followed quickly by something more complex, gratitude tinged with shame. "We can't possibly repay you," my father began. "I don't expect repayment," I interrupted. "This isn't a loan. It's simply what I can do with the resources I have." "And beyond the financial help?" my mother ventured carefully. "Will we see you again?" The question hung between us, weighted with decades of hurt and neglect. They were asking for more than financial rescue. They wanted re-entry into my life, a relationship with the daughter they'd effectively discarded. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I'm not sure what that would look like." "Whatever you're comfortable with," Emma said quickly. "Phone calls, emails, holiday cards. We're not asking you to pretend the past didn't happen." "Aren't you?" I looked at each of them in turn. "Because that's exactly what we did for years. Pretended sleeping in the garage was normal. Pretended it wasn't a clear message about who mattered in this family." "We can't change the past," my father said. "But maybe we can build something different going forward, if you're willing to give us that chance." I considered this as I looked around the kitchen where I'd once belonged, before the renovation, before the garage, before I became an inconvenience rather than a daughter. Could there be a new relationship that acknowledged the past without being defined by it? Was I capable of building something with these people who had once rejected me? "I need time," I said finally. "This isn't something I can decide in one conversation." They nodded, clearly having expected nothing more. In their eyes, I saw recognition of the power shift between us. They had once controlled every aspect of my life, from where I slept to what opportunities I received. Now I held the power, financial, emotional, relational. "However much time you need," my mother said softly, "we'll be here." The rest of the visit passed in less fraught conversation. They asked careful questions about Safe Haven, about my life in Boston. I provided edited highlights, the Microsoft partnership, our growing team, the consumer security app's success. I omitted the pending acquisition talks, the personal toll of building a company from nothing, the nightmares about the garage that still occasionally disrupted my sleep. After an hour, I made my exit, promising only to think about what kind of relationship might be possible. Emma walked me to my car, hovering awkwardly as I unlocked the door. "Thank you," she said finally. "For coming, for helping them, for considering letting us back into your life at all." I studied my sister, this woman who had once enjoyed the master bedroom while I shivered in the garage. Her privilege hadn't ultimately served her well. While I had built a life of achievement and independence, she had remained trapped in patterns of dependence, never developing the resilience that my hardships had forced upon me. "I'm not doing it for them," I told her honestly, "or even for you. I'm doing it because I need to resolve this chapter of my life, one way or another." She nodded, understanding. "For what it's worth, I really am proud of you. What you've accomplished is incredible." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. The younger Olivia would have craved that acknowledgement desperately. The woman I'd become accepted it as a pleasant but unnecessary affirmation. The drive back to my hotel was quieter than the journey out. The confrontation I'd dreaded for years had happened, and the world hadn't ended. My parents had acknowledged their failures. Emma had owned her complicity. No one had tried to minimize or justify what they'd done. And yet, resolution felt incomplete. What exactly did reconciliation look like in a situation like this? Weekly phone calls? Holiday visits? Pretending to be a normal family despite our profoundly abnormal history? I spent the evening in my hotel room on video calls with our executive team, discussing acquisition updates and development timelines. The familiar rhythm of business decisions was comforting after the emotional complexity of the family meeting. Here at least I knew my value. Here, my competence was celebrated rather than taken for granted. Late that night, I received a text from Emma. I know today was hard. Whatever you decide about moving forward, I want you to know I see you now in a way I didn't when we were kids. You deserved better. We all make choices about who we become despite our circumstances. You made good ones. I'm trying to do the same. Now, the message was unexpected, thoughtful in a way the self-absorbed sister of my memory had never been. Perhaps she too had done some growing in the years of our separation. I replied simply, "Thank you for saying that. It matters." The next morning, as I prepared to return to Boston, I made a detour. Instead of heading directly to the airport, I drove to the outskirts of Pinecrest, where new development had created a small cluster of senior living apartments. Modern, single-level units designed for aging residents with mobility concerns. The leasing office was just opening when I arrived. An hour later, I left with the paperwork for a 2-bedroom unit with accessibility features, paid in full for a 2-year lease, with option to renew. Not extravagant, but comfortable, safe, and designed for someone with my father's health limitations. I texted Emma the address and details. This might be a better option than the house. No stairs, medical facilities nearby, maintenance included. Their choice, not an obligation. I'm heading back to Boston now. We'll be in touch. Her response came quickly. Thank you, Olivia, for everything. On the flight home, I found myself contemplating the nature of power and forgiveness. The garage bedroom had been an expression of power, my parents over me, their ability to determine my living conditions without consideration for my well-being. Now, ironically, I held similar power over them. My financial resources could determine their housing, healthcare, basic security. The difference was in how that power was wielded. They had used theirs to diminish me. I could use mine to provide for them without demanding the emotional submission they had required of me. I could offer assistance without requiring gratitude. I could maintain boundaries while still acknowledging our connection. Perhaps that was what forgiveness looked like. Not forgetting the harm done, but refusing to perpetuate its patterns. Not trusting blindly, but offering measured opportunities for something new to develop. Zoe was waiting at my apartment when I returned to Boston, eager for details of the confrontation. "So?" she prompted as I dropped my bag inside the door. "How was seeing the garage parents? As awful as expected?" "Different," I said, struggling to articulate the complex emotions of the visit. They acknowledged what they did, admitted it was wrong, didn't try to justify it. "Wow," she raised her eyebrows. "That's actually more than I expected." Me too. I sank onto my sofa, suddenly exhausted. I helped them, found them a better place to live, one that will work with Dad's health issues. Set up the medical trust. And emotionally? Where does this leave things? I considered this, truly uncertain of the answer. I don't know yet. Not estranged anymore, but not close either. Somewhere in between. A work in progress. She nodded, accepting this ambiguity. You know, most people would have told them to go to hell. The fact that you didn't says something about who you are. Or maybe it says something about who I want to be, I countered. Someone who doesn't perpetuate the patterns that hurt me. The next morning, I returned to Safe Haven's offices, where acquisition discussions had entered a critical phase. 3 serious contenders remained: Google, Amazon, and Cisco, each offering different visions for our technology's future and our team's role within their organizations. As I reviewed the proposals with our executive team, I found myself considering them through a new lens. Beyond the financial implications, beyond the technical synergies, what would each option mean for the culture we'd built? For the people who had trusted their careers to our vision? For the users who relied on our technology to create their own safe digital spaces? Marcus Devereaux noticed the shift in my questions. After the meeting, he lingered in the conference room as others filed out. "Something's changed," he observed. "Your perspective seems different since your trip." I hadn't told him the real purpose of my absence, but Marcus was perceptive enough to recognize the shift in my thinking. "I'm considering our legacy," I explained. "Not just the exit valuation, but what happens to Safe Haven's vision after acquisition." He nodded slowly. "The best founders always do. It's never just about the money, it's about protecting what you've built." He paused. "Whatever happened during your time away, it seems to have clarified your priorities." He wasn't wrong. Confronting. My past had indeed sharpened my understanding of what mattered most to me. Not just financial success, but creating genuine security for those who depended on me. My team. Our users. And perhaps, in a more complicated way, the family that had once failed to provide that security for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The garage girl had built a company dedicated to creating safe spaces because she had lacked one when it mattered most. Now, as that company approached its next evolution, the lessons of the garage would determine its future, and mine. The acquisition offers sat on my desk like a row of lottery tickets, each promising a different version of extraordinary fortune. $700 million from Google, with plans to integrate our security protocols into their ecosystem. $800 million from Amazon, envisioning Safe Haven as the cornerstone of their smart home strategy. Cisco's more modest $650, but with greater autonomy for our team and continued brand identity. Life-changing sums that would transform everyone connected to Safe Haven. Our investors, our employees, Zoe and me. The garage girl could cash out, buy an island, and never think about security or family or belonging again. But that wasn't who I'd become. "You're hesitating," Marcus observed during our weekly strategy session. 3 months ago, you would have made this decision already. I nodded, acknowledging the truth in his assessment. "The terms are all strong. Financially, we can't go wrong with any of them. But it's not just about the money." I gestured toward the window overlooking our Cambridge campus, where 60-plus employees worked on technology that protected millions of users worldwide. "It's about what happens to all of this afterward." Marcus leaned back, studying me with newfound interest. "I've seen this before. Founders reaching the summit and suddenly questioning the climb. Sometimes it's fear of losing purpose. Sometimes it's realizing money doesn't solve the problems they thought it would." "It's simpler than that," I replied. "I built Safe Haven to create security for people who need it. I'm not convinced acquisition is the best way to fulfill that mission." 2 weeks after my Michigan visit, the question of Safe Haven's future remained unresolved. The acquisition talks continued, with each potential buyer increasing their offers and sweetening terms. Our board members were growing impatient, eager to realize the return on their investment. Only Zoe seemed to understand my hesitation. "You're thinking about your parents, aren't you?" she asked one evening as we shared late-night dumplings in my office, acquisition documents spread across my desk. "About what happens if we sell." I poked at a dumpling with my chopsticks. "Not exactly. It's more, I'm thinking about why we started this in the first place." She nodded, waiting for me to continue. "We didn't build Safe Haven to get rich," I said slowly. "We built it because we understood what it meant to feel unsafe. Me in that garage, you dealing with your family's expectations. We wanted to create something that gave people control over their digital lives. Real security, not just the illusion of it." "And you're worried the acquirers won't prioritize that vision," she concluded. "I know they won't. They can't. Their business models fundamentally rely on data access that contradicts true privacy. The technology would be maintained, maybe even improved, but the mission would be compromised." Zoe considered this, her expression thoughtful. "So what's the alternative? Stay independent?" "Maybe." I pushed the acquisition papers aside. "Or maybe something else entirely." The something else had been forming in my mind since Michigan, a radical alternative that would either secure Safe Haven's mission for decades or destroy significant financial opportunity. I wasn't ready to share it yet, not until I'd examined every angle. Instead of focusing on the acquisition details, I spent the next week researching alternative corporate structures, employee ownership models, B Corps and public benefit corporations, long-term trust arrangements that could protect a company's mission beyond its founder's involvement. I also made a series of calls I'd been avoiding, to my parents, to Emma, to the medical specialists handling my father's care. Not from obligation, but from a growing recognition that resolving my past was somehow intertwined with determining Safe Haven's future. "The apartment is perfect," my mother told me during one such call. Her voice still held the awkward formality that characterized our renewed communication, but there was genuine gratitude underneath. "Your father can navigate everything with his walker, and the medical center is just down the street. I'm glad it's working out," I said, and meant it. The senior living complex offered them dignity without dependence, proper housing with appropriate accommodations for my father's condition, but without the burden of maintenance that had becoming increasingly difficult for them. "Emma visits every weekend," she continued. "She's been helping us settle in. She mentioned you two have been talking?" It was true. My sister and I had established a cautious communication pattern: texts, occasional calls, careful explorations of adult sisterhood without the toxic family dynamics that had previously defined our relationship. She had surprised me with her self-awareness, her willingness to acknowledge the harmful patterns of our childhood without defensiveness. "We have," I confirmed. "It's a work in progress. Like all of us," my mother said softly. There was a pause, then, "Olivia, I want you to know something. What we did to you, what I allowed to happen, it wasn't because we didn't love you. We made terrible choices based on misguided priorities. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just for you to know that you were always loved, even when our actions didn't show it." The statement landed strangely, part justification, part genuine expression of regret. The younger me would have rejected it outright, seeing it as another attempt to minimize harm. The woman I'd become could hold its complexity, the possibility that people could love imperfectly, harmfully, and still genuinely. "Thank you for saying that," I said after a moment. "It helps to hear it." We spoke for a few minutes more about practical matters, upcoming medical appointments, the progress of their move, Emma's latest community organizing efforts. Not the comfortable conversation of a close-knit family, but not the strained silence of estrangement either, something new, being built one careful brick at a time. After the call, I returned to the question that had occupied me for weeks. What did I truly want for Safe Haven's future? What would honor both the company's mission and my personal journey? The answer came during a seemingly routine board meeting. We were reviewing the acquisition offers for perhaps the 20th time when one of our early investors, Janet Chen, asked a question that cut through the financial details. "Olivia, if money were no object, if you had unlimited resources and could chart any course for Safe Haven, what would you do next?" The question silenced the room. Venture capitalists didn't typically ask founders about dream scenarios. They asked about realistic exit strategies and return maximization. But Janet had always been different, more interested in meaningful innovation than quick profits. "I'd take it public," I said without hesitation. "But not as a traditional IPO. I'd structure it as a public benefit corporation with a dual-class share system that would preserve our mission while allowing for scale and impact." Marcus frowned. "That would significantly reduce the acquisition premium. You'd be leaving hundreds of millions on the table." "For what gain?" Janet pressed, ignoring Marcus's objection. "What would that structure allow you to do that acquisition wouldn't?" "Keep our promise," I said simply. When people trust Safe Haven with their data, their privacy, their digital security. They're trusting us to protect them, not monetize them. Acquisition by any of these companies would eventually compromise that trust, no matter what assurances they're offering now. The room fell silent as the implications of my statement settled. I was effectively rejecting acquisition offers approaching $1 billion in favor of a more complex, less immediately lucrative path. "This isn't just about Safe Haven anymore, is it?" Marcus asked quietly. "Something changed after your trip to Michigan." He wasn't wrong. My confrontation with my parents had clarified something essential. The garage hadn't just been about physical discomfort or parental favoritism. It had been about having my trust violated by the very people who should have protected me. About learning that those with power couldn't be counted on to use it ethically. Safe Haven exists because I understand what it means to feel unsafe in the place that should be your sanctuary, I said, looking around the boardroom at the investors who had backed our vision. I can't in good conscience sell that understanding to companies whose business models fundamentally rely on surveillance and data extraction. Janet nodded slowly. That's a founder's prerogative, and I respect it. But you'll need to make a compelling case to the rest of the board. Many of us invested with the expectation of an acquisition exit. "Give me 2 weeks," I requested. "I'll present a complete alternative strategy that addresses everyone's concerns." Those 2 weeks became the most intense period of planning since Safe Haven's earliest days. Zoe and I worked around the clock, consulting with securities attorneys, investment bankers, governance experts, and ethics specialists. We developed a comprehensive proposal for Safe Haven's future as an independent, publicly traded public benefit corporation, one that would balance profitability with purpose, shareholder returns with stakeholder commitments. The garage girl, who had once struggled to afford textbooks, now found herself designing corporate governance structures that would outlast her lifetime. In parallel with this professional transformation, I continued the careful reconstruction of family relationships. A pattern emerged: weekly calls with my parents, focused primarily on my father's health and their adjustment to the new apartment. More frequent communication with Emma, evolving from cautious reconnection to something approaching genuine sisterhood. During one such call, Emma shared news that surprised me. "I'm starting a nonprofit," she announced, "a housing advocacy organization focused on youth homelessness and unsafe living conditions." "That's unexpected," I replied, wondering if this was somehow related to our shared history. "Is it?" She laughed softly. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened to you, about how many kids are in similar or worse situations right now, living in garages, basements, cars, unsafe spaces that adults justify because it's convenient. And you want to help them? I want to change the systems that allow it to happen," she clarified. "Policy advocacy, direct support, education campaigns. It's not going to make me rich, but it matters." The parallel to my own journey wasn't lost on me. We had both, in our own ways, transformed the trauma of my garage exile into purpose. Mine through technology that created digital safety, hers through advocacy that addressed physical safety. "It does matter," I agreed. "Have you secured funding yet?" "Working on it. Grant applications, local donations. It's slow going." I hesitated only briefly. "Send me your business plan. Safe Haven might be interested in becoming a founding corporate sponsor." Her surprise was audible. "Really? You do that?" "If the plan is solid, absolutely. Our missions are aligned even if our approaches are different." This convergence of personal healing and professional purpose reinforced my conviction about Safe Haven's path forward. 2 days before the deadline I'd requested from our board, I finalized the proposal that would either secure our independence or trigger a leadership crisis. The board meeting began with tension thick enough to touch. Our investors had been patient, but hundreds of millions in potential returns hung in the balance. Marcus arranged the seating strategically, positioning more acquisition-friendly board members directly across from me, a subtle pressure tactic I recognized from countless negotiations. Thank you all for giving me time to develop this alternative proposal, I began, distributing detailed documentation to each member. What I'm presenting today is a comprehensive strategy for Safe Haven's next decade, one that honors our mission, while delivering significant returns to everyone in this room. Over the next 2 hours, I outlined a vision that diverged radically from standard venture capital expectations. Instead of a clean acquisition exit, I proposed a unique corporate structure that would preserve Safe Haven's independence while creating substantial value. First, conversion to a public benefit corporation that would legally enshrine our mission of creating genuinely secure digital spaces alongside profit motives. Second, a dual-class share structure that would maintain mission-focused governance while still attracting public market investment. Third, a phased liquidity plan that would allow our early investors to realize significant returns through secondary offerings rather than a single acquisition event. Fourth, an employee ownership component that would align our team's incentives with long-term success rather than short-term exit opportunities. As I concluded the presentation, the room remained silent. Janet was the first to speak. "This is unorthodox," she said carefully, "but remarkably thorough. The financial projections are conservative but compelling." Marcus seemed less convinced. "It's an interesting academic exercise, but the reality is that the acquisition offers provide guaranteed returns now. This proposal asks us to accept uncertainty and delayed gratification, with potentially greater upside," Janet countered. "If Safe Haven achieves even half of what Olivia projects as an independent entity, the returns could exceed the acquisition premiums within 5 years." The debate continued for another hour, with board members dividing roughly evenly between immediate acquisition advocates and those intrigued by the alternative vision. As the meeting approached its conclusion, I made one final appeal. When you invested in Safe Haven, you weren't just backing a security product. You were backing a mission, and the founders dedicated to fulfilling it. I'm asking you to continue that support, not because it's the easiest path forward, but because it's the one most aligned with why we exist in the first place. The vote was scheduled for the following week, giving board members time to review the detailed proposal and consult with their respective firms. The intervening days stretched interminably as Zoe and I awaited a decision that would determine not just our financial futures, but the legacy of everything we'd built. During this limbo period, I received an unexpected call from my father. We had settled into a pattern of brief, somewhat formal weekly conversations, usually initiated by my mother. Direct communication from him remained rare. "Olivia, do you have a moment?" His voice sounded stronger than during my visit, the new medication regimen showing positive effects. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Yes, fine." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "I wanted to talk to you about something. Your mother mentioned you've been making some important business decisions lately." I tensed slightly, wondering what this could possibly have to do with him. "That's right. We're determining Safe Haven's next phase." "I don't pretend to understand the details of what you do," he continued. "But I wanted to tell you something I should have said years ago. Trust your judgment. You've always had an exceptional ability to see the right path forward, even when those around you couldn't." The unexpected vote of confidence left me momentarily speechless. "The garage?" he continued, his voice tightening. "That was our failure, not yours. We didn't see your value then. Don't let anyone make you doubt your value now, in business or anything else." It wasn't quite an apology, but something equally meaningful. An acknowledgement of my worth from the man whose approval I'd once desperately sought. Coming at this pivotal moment, his words carried a significance that surprised me. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than you might realize." The board's decision came the following Tuesday, a split vote that ultimately tipped in favor of my proposal, with Janet casting the deciding ballot. Safe Haven would remain independent, pursuing the public benefit corporation path I had outlined. The acquisition offers approaching $1 billion collectively, would be declined. Some board members resigned in protest, unwilling to wait for the more gradual returns my strategy promised. Others doubled down, increasing their investments to strengthen our position ahead of the planned public offering. The team fragmented and reconstituted around the new vision, shedding those motivated primarily by quick exits while attracting mission-aligned partners. The next 6 months transformed Safe Haven in ways both subtle and profound. Our corporate charter was rewritten to explicitly prioritize user privacy and security alongside profitability. Our compensation structure evolved to include long-term equity grants that aligned employee incentives with sustained independence. Our product roadmap expanded to include free security tools for vulnerable populations, domestic violence survivors, political dissidents, at-risk youth. Throughout this transformation, my reconciliation with family continued its careful progress. My father underwent his scheduled surgery with positive results. My mother discovered unexpected community in their new living complex. Emma's nonprofit secured initial funding, including a substantial grant from Safe Haven's newly established foundation, and began its advocacy work. The garage girl who had once been exiled from her family home was now creating homes of various kinds: digital sanctuaries for millions of users, physical housing through Emma's nonprofit, professional belonging for our growing team, and even a cautious new family relationship built on more balanced terms. A year after declining the acquisition offers, Safe Haven completed its initial public offering as a public benefit corporation. The market response exceeded even our most optimistic projections, valuing the company at $1.2 billion, significantly more than the highest acquisition offer we'd rejected. Our early investors, even those who had opposed independence, saw their returns multiply. The morning of the IPO, Zoe and I stood in Times Square, watching Safe Haven's logo illuminate the massive NASDAQ display. The garage girl and the restaurant owner's daughter, who had once huddled under blankets in a freezing Chicago apartment, were now ringing the opening bell as executives of a public company they controlled. "Did you ever imagine this?" Zoe asked. As we waved for the cameras, the ceremonial bell still reverberating. "Never," I admitted. "Not even close." Later that evening, after the media interviews and celebration dinner, I sat alone in my hotel room overlooking Manhattan. The day's events had left me exhilarated but strangely reflective. I picked up my phone and made a call I hadn't planned. "Olivia?" my mother answered, surprise evident in her voice. We had our scheduled calls on Sundays, not random weekday evenings. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "Better than fine, actually. We completed the public offering today. Safe Haven is officially a public company now." "Oh, that's wonderful." Her enthusiasm seemed genuine. "We saw you on CNBC this morning. Your father recorded it." The image of my parents watching me on financial news was surreal, worlds colliding, in ways I couldn't have imagined years ago. "I wanted to tell you something," I continued. "When I was designing Safe Haven's new corporate structure, I created a special trust that will receive a percentage of our annual profits." "That sounds complicated, but important," she said, clearly trying to follow business concepts outside her experience. "The trust has 2 purposes," I explained. "Half the funds support our security tools for vulnerable populations. The other half—" I paused, still uncertain about the decision I'd made months ago. "The other half establishes a foundation dedicated to safe housing initiatives for at-risk youth. It's being structured to work directly with Emma's nonprofit." The silence that followed contained multitudes: surprise, confusion, perhaps even understanding. "You're using your success to prevent what happened to you from happening to others," she said finally, comprehension dawning in her voice. "In a way," I acknowledged. The garage was never just about physical discomfort. It was about what it represented, being deemed less important, less deserving of safety and belonging. No child should experience that, whether in a literal garage or any other unsafe space. My mother's voice wavered slightly. You've turned what we did wrong into something right. That's remarkable, Olivia. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. That remained a complicated, ongoing process. But it was something equally important. Purpose extracted from pain, meaning derived from mistreatment, legacy built from loss. When I'd first left home for Chicago, I'd been defined by what I was fleeing: the garage, the favoritism, the fundamental insecurity of my childhood. Now, a decade later, I was defined instead by what I was building: a company committed to genuine security, relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, systems that protected the vulnerable rather than exploiting them. The Chow. Forbes' profile published the week after our IPO described me as a mission-driven founder who rejected acquisition billions to maintain user privacy commitments. The journalist had asked repeatedly about my motivation. What had instilled such an uncommon commitment to security and independence? I'd given the sanitized version, speaking vaguely about early experiences with insecurity that had shaped my values. The full garage story remained private, not from shame, but from ownership. It was mine to carry, to learn from, to transform, not fodder for business magazines or inspirational narratives. The public didn't need to know about the 14-year-old shivering beside her father's Chevy to understand the importance of Safe Haven's mission. 6 months after the IPO, I returned to Michigan for Emma's nonprofit's inaugural fundraising gala. It marked our first public appearance as a family in over a decade. My parents in their carefully selected formal wear, Emma in her element as executive director, me as the keynote speaker and principal donor. Before the event, we gathered at my parents' apartment for a private moment away from donors and supporters. My father, moving slowly but steadily with his walker, embraced me awkwardly, our first physical contact since my return to their lives. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "Both of you," he added, including Emma in his gaze. "You've both found ways to make something good from our mistakes." My mother wiped tears from her eyes. "We don't deserve this. Your success, your generosity, your willingness to have any relationship with us at all." "It's not about deserving," I said after a moment's consideration. "It's about choosing. Every day, we all choose what to build with the materials we're given, even when those materials include hurt and disappointment." Emma nodded, understanding in a way perhaps only she could. The garage chapter doesn't define our whole story, just like Mom and Dad's failures don't define theirs. It wasn't perfect reconciliation. That fairy tale ending existed only in simpler narratives than ours. But it was authentic healing, the kind built on truth rather than denial, on accountability rather than amnesia. The garage would always be part of our shared history, neither forgotten nor all-defining. Later that evening, standing at the podium addressing room of donors supporting Emma's housing initiative, I spoke about security in its broadest sense, not just locks and alarms, but the fundamental human need for safety and belonging. I didn't mention the garage specifically, but its lessons infused every word. When we talk about safe housing, we're not just discussing physical structures, I told the audience. We're talking about spaces where people are valued, where their needs matter, where they can develop into their fullest selves without fear of displacement or disregard. I caught Emma's eye across the room, saw her slight nod of recognition. We had each translated our shared history into different but complementary missions. Her organization addressing physical housing security, while Safe Haven protected digital safety. Together, we were addressing the full spectrum of what we had once lacked. In the years that followed, Safe Haven continued its independent growth, eventually expanding to over 500 employees and millions of users worldwide. The public benefit corporation structure proved both profitable and principled, attracting investors and customers who valued our commitment to genuine security over data monetization. My relationship with my parents evolved into something I hadn't imagined possible, not the unconditional closeness some families enjoyed, but a measured connection based on clear boundaries and mutual respect. My father's health stabilized with proper care. My mother found purpose volunteering with Emma's organization. The power dynamics that had once defined our family, with me perpetually at the bottom, had been permanently rebalanced. The garage girl had emerged not just successful, but whole, defined not by victimhood, but by vision, not by what had been denied, but by what had been created. The unsafe space that had shaped my adolescence had ultimately inspired safe spaces for millions. And in that transformation lay the most powerful lesson of all. Our deepest wounds, when acknowledged and addressed, can become our greatest sources of purpose. The very experiences that could have destroyed us can, with time, work, and intention, become the foundation for something meaningful and enduring. Not despite our past, but because of it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.